Hey, this is Mark watching MTC Media with my takeaways from Virginia's 87-69 loss to Florida in an ACC SEC challenge that did not go well for the ACC, so it wasn't just the Cavaliers. We're going to start off by one of the complaints during the broadcast was Day Ames over dribbling, and they didn't call Day out by name, but every time they spoke about it, he was the one who's the primary ball handler. I think it was somewhat unfair, and I'll tell you why. Not only did Florida have really good ball pressure, but Florida was taking away those initial actions off the ball. There was no place for the ball to go. And then as the initial actions were taken away, and finally Virginia would get into an action where the actual first pass happened and they could get into their subsequent actions, it looked like a struggle, because it was a struggle. Whatever Florida did in their scout must have been wonderful, because those kids looked dialed in defensively beyond just, hey, let's do what we do conceptually under our philosophy. It was, in our scout, it says when you see this, do that. In our scout, this is what we're taking away initially down the floor. It looked like a great scout job by Florida. And so to blame it on Ames, I could understand if Day was coming down and he's going through his bag, and then once he couldn't get to the basket, he passed it. That's not necessarily what happened. Were there some cases where you could maybe argue that? There's a few, but by and large, no. I think what could have helped Virginia in this case was pushing the ball up faster and getting into your initial actions in secondary transition while the defense was getting set up from you pushing the ball up the floor. Now, it's hard to push the ball up the floor when you're, taking the ball out the basket too. And they did a lot of having to take the ball out of the basket. But the pace for Virginia actually needed to be quicker and not slower. And because it was so slow, because they were so hunkered down, Virginia couldn't get penetration. Not off the bounce. It was hard for them to get penetration out for the bounce. So then you don't get penetration out for the bounce, then it's hard to open up your snipers. It's hard to get someone like Buchanan involved, because now you're not breaking down the defense and then getting him the ball and having him attack someone trying to either recover or rotate, which makes him a better player. So there was a lot of things that added up that I thought during the broadcast was being just either oversimplified, or it was, we're going to blame this particular player, when I don't necessarily think it was that particular player's fault. I thought it was very, very misleading. Florida's size isn't just size, it's skill size. And this is what I will say about where college basketball has changed, even since Virginia won their national championship. The size and the skill is much better than what it was. Even when Virginia won the national championship, you can say, well, that wasn't that long ago. Right. Basketball has changed that much in that small of a time. And you know what conference is taking the most advantage of that? The SEC. Look at the guys they are recruiting. So that skilled size was a big issue to Virginia. And you saw it in the Tennessee game, even though St. John's is in the Big East and it's not as skilled size as some of these SEC teams. Rick Pitino has some of that element on his roster. And I saw this. I watched Florida play Wake. And it was a similar thing. Wake got off to a good start. Virginia got off to a good start. But Florida, everything is in the concept of 40 minutes. It doesn't matter if you get off to a good start in the first 5-6 minutes. Everything conceptually that they do, how they build out their game plans, their scouts, everything they do is to weaponize their depth, their size and their skill size over 40 minutes. And just like in the Wake game, the further this game went along, the more it looked like Florida was just taking over. The more it looked like UVA and Wake before them were running offense in quicksand. The more it made their offense look like it was forcing. And then you lead to the turnovers. Virginia ended up, I'll pull this up right here. I think they had 14. They had 15. And then you get the 15 turnovers from UVA. And then that happens over time. But that's because that's how they're built. And that's because this is sort of part of what they're going to do. And they have to do it in the SEC to survive. And what these outer conference opponents have found out is that, wow, this is hard to play through. This is hard to execute to the level that we're used to executing over 40 minutes. Both Virginia and Wake did not get enough off-script plays. Virginia really doesn't have off-script guys. Wake, I mean, you can say you have Hunter Salas who can get things off-script, but you also asked him to play point this year. So that's also tough. So Virginia just did not have the personnel to deal with Florida's skilled size. And this goes to the first two things I've said. The inability to get to the free throw line. Virginia has to have more than 10 free throw attempts. Just because how they play, just because the number of possessions that they desire to have in a game. They want to get layups, they want to get free throws, and then they want to get their prerequisite amount of threes with Rhodey and McNeely. And so they didn't really get, I didn't think the threes were bad. They were 8 for 21. I mean, that's over, that's almost 40%. So it's not bad. And, you know, Virginia's not going to be a team that's going to shoot 35 threes. So I don't want anyone thinking, well, they didn't shoot enough of them. That wasn't the case, because that's supposed to be in combination of getting a high number of free throw attempts along with being able to get more stuff to the basket. We talked about the penetration wasn't there. We talked about initial actions being taken away. So that makes it tough, and that's when you only have 10 free throw attempts. Heck, they made 9 of them. They just couldn't get there enough. And again, it was Florida's pressure that took away that stuff from UVA. That was a good game plan. That was a great scout. The Wake game, that was a great scout by Florida. And sometimes you got, at this point of the season, and that's the other thing too, at this point of the season, sometimes you just got to tip your cap to the opponent, because maybe they're further ahead into their progressions than you are. In this case, it could be because, you know, of the coaching change coming a little bit late for Virginia, and they're slowly but surely putting in more stuff that looks different. And so not only are you trying to get these guys who are out the portal, get continuity around them, you're kind of taking a little bit of the programming out of the returning kids of how things were done. So, I mean, you don't want to just necessarily poo-poo away an 18-point loss in a very high visible game. But again, I thought that there were times where the guys who called the game were kind of unfair to some of Virginia's players. And I think there needs to be an understanding that even though Sanchez does a lot of the same things that Tony did, they're not the same person. And they're not the same philosophy. And you saw it. Look, think about it this way. Guthrie sat on the bench with Dean Smith for how long? And even when Guthrie took over, there were some changes that he made that he would like to do. And that's fine. They're not supposed to be a carbon copy of their predecessor, even though conceptually they might use the same things. So again, those are my takeaways for Virginia's 87-69 loss to Florida. This is Marcus Washington, MTC Media.